The purpose of this video is to see if the ADS-B data for MH370 supports our theory that MH370 turned back much earlier than stated in the official report. It is interesting that all the flight tracking sites were able to record the ADS-B signal soon after takeoff, but the Malaysian government system only had one ADS-B receiver on MH370's flight path, based near the northern coastline. So it was only able to pick up MH370 when it reached 16,000 feet. We have no issue with this. But it is a bit strange not to have an ADS-B receiver closer to its main airport at Kuala Lumpur. After doing a detailed analysis of the ADS-B data, we could find no issues with it except for some out-of-time sequences, when compared to the ACARS log. In other words, the times found in the satellite log ACARS transactions did not exactly match up with those in the ADS-B log. However, most likely the error was in the satellite log and not with the ADS-B data. The summary of our findings with the ADS-B data are: the last ADS-B positions were near Agari. It correlated with the various aircraft tracking sites data, for example Flight Radar 24. It correlated with the civilian radar plots diagram, and also the partially released data set of the civilian radar up to latitude north 5.2. The remainder of the civilian radar data from latitude 5.2 to Agari was not released, so we were not able to do any analysis with this missing data. The ADS-B data also correlates with the air traffic control recording, with the last handover being near Agari. So on a standalone basis, the ADS-B data shows that MH370 did pass near Agari at 1:21 a.m. But we do know that there is a lot of evidence to show that MH370 never made it to Agari. This was covered in detail in the following videos, but we will now just give you a brief summary. Flight tracking sites. The ADS-B log captures the same ADS-B data that is received by the flight tracking sites. They should all match up, but they do not. This means that the ADS-B data received does not make any sense. Therefore, this implies that there are issues with both the flight tracking sites data and also the ADS-B log. The ADS-B log uses the same source as the flight radar tracking sites. We calculated the flight tracking sites could track MH370 no further than latitude 5.2 north. Therefore, the last position of latitude 6.9 north in the ADS-B log cannot be valid. The data that was extracted from Flight Radar 24 should all have consistent rounding on the latitude fields. This was not the case. 57 of the entries, as expected, were rounded to 5 decimal places. However, towards the end of the file, there were 6 entries that were rounded to 1 or 2 decimal places. A computer program would be expected to handle the rounding of each entry in a consistent manner. Therefore, very likely this means that the data must have been altered post-flight. For Flight Radar 24, 2 sets of data were extracted. The first one was the actual data received by Flight Radar 24 from MH370. The other one was created by extracting the data from playbacks of the flight. They should both contain the same values. However, the last 2 transactions are identical except for the altitude. The one that saved the actual data transmitted from MH370 showed an altitude of 35,000 feet, whilst the one used to play back the flight showed a nil altitude. This does not appear to be possible, so the most likely reason that this would occur is if data has been edited post-flight. The ADS-B data from MH370 was logged by Flight Radar 24, and also by the official Malaysian ADS-B log file. As Flight Radar 24 was receiving the same data from MH370, it should tie up with the Malaysian ADS-B log. However, it did not. The first issue is that the last set of transactions in the Flight Radar 24 log all show an altitude of 35,000 feet, while the matching entries in the ADS-B log show an altitude of nil. This typically would only occur if the data has been edited post-flight. The last transmission recorded by Flight Radar 24 is at time 17:21 and 3 seconds. However, the last transmission recorded in the ADS-B log is at time 17:20 and 35 seconds. This means the ADS-B log is missing 28 seconds of transactions, as it records them at around the rate of 1 every half second. It means over 50 transactions are missing. Most likely this would only occur if the data has been edited post-flight. Air traffic control recording. The analysis of the air traffic control recording shows that the last two transmissions never happened, so therefore they needed to be created by copying and pasting from prior transmissions. This would not be needed to be done if MH370 actually made it to ACARS. Therefore, as the last entry in the ADS-B log is close to ACARS, this again adds weight to the fact that the ADS-B log has been edited post-flight. Civilian radar data. Analysis shows that likely the civilian radar data for MH370 is only valid up to about latitude 5.2 north, as the ADS-B log has a final entry of latitude 6.9 north. Then this implies that the log has been amended post-flight. Satellite log. The ACARS data stored in the satellite log shows MH370 flying faster compared with the ADS-B log. This implies that there are mismatches between these two data sources. This again casts doubt on the accuracy of the ADS-B log. And air traffic control procedures. The Malaysian air traffic controllers did not fill in the paper flight progress strip, which should have been done when MH370 was handed over to Vietnam. This implies MH370 never made it to ACARS, thus putting doubt on the last entry of latitude 6.9 north in the ADS-B log. At the time Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 went missing on the 8th of March in 2014, public statements from senior sources indicated Malaysia operated only one ADS-B receiver, that is the ADS-B receiver at Kuala Terengganu, which had been in service since 2008. Consequently, the only official ADS-B log released after the incident was from Kuala Terengganu. A Malaysian official document mentions that the Genting Highlands ADS-B receiver was commissioned in the 22nd of December, 2016. Despite that, an ADS-B log attributed to the Genting receiver was released 11 years after the disappearance of MH370. That raises two straightforward questions. Why was the date for the commissioning of Genting in 2016, when it was able to record MH370 in 2014? This is 2 years before it was commissioned. Also, why weren't the two ADS-B logs released at the same time? The Genting ADS-B receiver was located about 63 nautical miles to the north of Kuala Lumpur Airport. The two ADS-B receivers should record essentially identical timestamps for the same transmissions from MH370. However, for all matching positions, those with identical latitude and longitude, the Genting receiver consistently logs each message 0.10156 seconds earlier than the Kuala Terengganu receiver. Given how ADS-B operates, one would expect any timestamp differences to be no more than a millisecond. Instead, the observed gap is more than 100 times larger, which is not consistent with normal ADS-B reception behavior. There could be several explanations for this discrepancy. However, the most likely scenario highlighted by AI, which also aligns with the other anomalies detected in the Genting ADS-B log, is that the data was added or modified post-flight. ADS-B timing is critical for cross-validating position, speed, and the sequence of events across multiple receivers. A systematic timestamp offset of this magnitude can alter the perceived order of events, affect drift calculations, and complicate reconstruction efforts. If the Genting log was produced, processed, or modified well after 2014, investigators ideally should clearly explain its provenance, the processing steps involved, and any corrections applied prior to release. Here is just one of many examples. The Kuala Terengganu and Genting ADS-B receivers recorded identical latitude and longitude, yet their timestamps differ by 0.10156 seconds. In the Kuala Terengganu ADS-B log, the shortest interval between consecutive position messages is 0.3960625 seconds. This is consistent with the expected transmission behavior of the aircraft's ADS-B transponder, which emits messages at fairly regular and physically plausible intervals. However, the Genting ADS-B log contains numerous intervals shorter than 0.25 seconds, including several as brief as 0.05 seconds. Such intervals are impossible for standard ADS-B transmission rates for location-type messages, and therefore strongly suggest that the Genting timestamps do not represent genuine real-time ADS-B reception. The log contains multiple invalid gaps. A small sample is shown below. These intervals fall outside the known behavior of ADS-B transmissions and suggest post-processing errors, reconstruction artifacts, or manual adjustments within the Genting ADS-B dataset. In several sections of the Genting ADS-B log, 3 consecutive transmissions, hereafter referred to as A, B, and C, are recorded by both ADS-B stations, Kuala Terengganu and Genting. For transmissions A and C, both receivers report identical latitude and longitude values. However, for the middle transmission, B, the Genting log stores a different latitude and longitude. Because ADS-B position decoding relies on pairing odd and even messages to produce a single resolved position, any 3 contiguous broadcasts within the same time window should yield the same position at both receivers, especially when A and C match perfectly. Yet, in the Genting dataset, only A and C match, while B does not, despite all 3 transmissions being clearly received by both stations. This behavior is inconsistent with normal ADS-B decoding logic, and strongly suggests that the Genting positional data for message B was modified or reconstructed post-flight. Here is an example where Genting transmission B differs by 29 meters. Not only is the Genting latitude and longitude for B offset by approximately 29 meters, but even after applying the fixed timing correction of 0.10156 seconds, the Genting timestamp for B remains 0.13281 seconds out of alignment. Both the positional and timing inconsistencies strongly indicate manual alteration or post-flight reconstruction errors. In another example, the Genting log contains a position 35 meters away from the closest matching record. In the Kuala Terengganu ADS-B log, after applying the known fixed timing offset of 0.10156 seconds, the 2 corresponding timestamps differ by only 0.00782 seconds. A displacement of 35 meters in 0.00782 seconds would imply a speed of Mach 13. Physically impossible for a commercial airliner. This strongly indicates that the Genting positional data were not generated by a live ADS-B receiver during the flight, but were likely manually altered, recalculated, or reconstructed post-flight. Here is an example showing the Genting data, 36 meters from that recorded by the other ADS-B receiver at Kuala Terengganu. It also shows that for the aircraft to be 36 meters away in the calculated time of 0.00781 seconds. As previously mentioned, the aircraft would need to be flying at Mach 13. In the previous example, the ADS-B transmission that was received under half a second earlier by the Genting receiver matches the Kuala Terengganu data exactly, with identical latitude and longitude. This confirms that the surrounding odd, even ADS-B message pairs were present and correctly decodable. Therefore, the positional inconsistency shown in the example above cannot be attributed to missing message pairs or normal decoding variability. The 4 potential anomalies identified in the Genting ADS-B log, released more than 11 years after MH370 disappeared, strongly indicate that the data was not naturally recorded from the aircraft. This in turn implies that the dataset was likely created or reconstructed post-flight. Although our research shows that the captain's flight simulator data was created after the aircraft went missing, has no direct bearing on whether MH370 made it to ACARS. It does, however, show that aircraft incident data has been modified. This adds more weight to the possibility that the ADS-B log was concocted after the aircraft went missing. So we cannot have a situation where the ADS-B data clearly shows MH370 started deviating from its flight plan near ACARS, and the other data that shows otherwise. They cannot all be correct. So the most likely case is that all the ADS-B data from about latitude 5.2 north has been generated after the aircraft went missing. To sum up, taking everything into account, the ADS-B data does not then confirm MH370 made it to ACARS.
Thanks for watching. For more information, please click on the links below. Please do subscribe to our channel and click the like button and share our video.